Welcome to European Journeys. We are starting a new series today, which will explore the Christianization of Norway. And the first place we are going to visit is a small suburb near Oslo called Urianenborg. One of the main sites to visit there is, in fact, a statue next to the church, the local church, which is in honor of Hans Nielsen Hauge, a man who lived between the 17th and 18th centuries. He was a Christian, and he is known to be the father of the industrialization of the country. But he's not. That's not the place we are going to focus on. In fact, the place we are going to visit is a crossroad that is very much unknown. I mean, there's nothing special there. It's a crossroads between two streets in a residential area of the suburb. But the reason we are going to start our tour from that crossroads is because of the names of the streets that are crossing each other there. One is called Odinsgate, and the other one is known as Thorsgate, that is Odin Street and Thor Street. Now, Odin and Thor are known as some of the most important gods of Norse mythology. Now, such street names would have been impossible, really, in medieval Norway. The fact that we find today street names after Thor and Odin really shows a certain interest, a certain positive attitude towards ancient Norse paganism, a resurgence of such interest towards Norse paganism, which has been observed especially within the last century. But we need to look a little bit at this ancient Norse paganism in order to understand the impact and the transformation that the Christianization of Norway brought to the country. It would not be uncommon today to find people, in fact, defending Norse paganism. You can do some search on the internet and you will find that some, in fact, are claiming that ancient Norse paganism was not as brutal as these early historians depicted that. And their claim is that, in fact, these early historians were, in fact, Christians and therefore biased by their religion and so pushed to bring a very bad description of ancient paganism. But, of course, at first glance, this may sound possible. After all, one wants to fight for his own belief system. But is that plausible? Is that true? Is that true? Well, firstly, we have to realize that someone who claims that ancient historians or early historians were biased because they were Christians cannot claim such a thing without first presupposing that he or she is not biased. And that's the kind of presupposition that we find so much in our time coming from some scholars. In fact, this is a belief that has been spread through the Enlightenment, the idea that we can do scientific research, we can do historical research from an unbiased position, from a neutral position, totally devoid of a belief system. But in fact, this is a lie, this is a myth itself. Someone who claims not to have any religion when he does historical research, in fact, needs at least to trust his own human reason and to trust that his human reason is able to interpret the world around him. And that is a belief system. That is a faith. It's a faith assumption. So it is not. There is no such thing as unbiased position. That's the first thing. Now, of course, also we could claim that, well, okay, he was a Christian historian, but does that follow that his report on ancient paganism was biased? Obviously not. We cannot go that far. But is there any traces? Can we find other sources that tell us of how these Norwegians could have been, these ancient pagan Norwegians could have been? Well, we need to go further back in history, in Roman times. We need to read a historian named Tacitus. Tacitus lived in the 1st century, and he talked of he was quite anti-Christian, to first start with that. So if he was biased against Christianity. And but he talked about the Teutonic tribes, which are known to be the ancestors of the Norwegians, who were particularly brutal with the slaves they owned, and they treated them as nothing better than cattle. Now, knowing that Tacitus lived himself in a society which allowed for slavery, that tells us a little bit about how these Teutonic tribes were, and being ancestors of Norwegians, we could infer that, in fact, things may have not necessarily changed in time. But of course, we cannot know for sure yet. So, is there another way to find out what really, if they really were as brutal as the early Christian historians, such as Adam of Bremen, claimed them to be? Well, we need to look at their belief system. What was really this Norse paganism? Well, there are ancient poems such as the Edda, a poem named Edda from Iceland, which tells us quite a lot about their beliefs, their belief system. And let's look a little bit about what was their belief about creation, about the creation of the world. What they believed is that the universe was divided between something called Muspelheim, the realm of fire above, and Niflheim below, which was the dark realm of ice and snow. And then in the middle there was a sort of magical void called Ginnungagap. Well, there was a well from Niflheim that was flowing into Ginnungagap, and at some point a spray of that well met the fire of Muspelheim. And as a result, a giant named Ymer was produced, together with his cow Audhumbla. Now from Ymer came the evil race of the Jotuns, who lived on the milk of Audhumbla, the cow. Audhumbla herself licked the salt from the rocks from which sprang Bure, and Bure was the grandson, Odin, the god who is named in this street, was the grandson of Bure. Now that's not all. Odin then killed Ymer, the giant, and his dead body was cast into that magical void of Ginnungagap, and then out of his body the world was thus formed. Ymer's flesh was the earth, was believed to be the earth, his blood the sea, his hair the trees, and so on. And the entire race of the Jotuns was then drowned into Ymer's blood, that is, into the sea. And then with his wife, Frigg, who was the all-nourishing, Odin, known as the All-Father, gave birth to Thor, so that is the name of the second street we find here, the Thunderer. Well, I'll stop here, we could go on and on, but this short description shows us about their belief system, about the origins of the universe, which the origin of the world, which in fact came out from violence and struggle. There was violence and struggle between the gods, subjection between the gods. This was the worldview, the Norse pagan worldview. So no wonder that they would treat people such as their own slaves as mere cattle, because in fact that was the way they understood the gods related with one another, and that was the way they understood the world even came into being. Religion always generates worldview, and we interpret the world according to the religion we have, whether it is rationalism, whether it is paganism, or whether it is Christianity. Now, what about Christianity? Christianity teaches us that God created the world by His word, and it was somehow, as it were, an effortless creation. He didn't have to fight against darkness, against some other gods to be able to create the world. This was His own making. If there is violence in the world, this is the root cause is not God Himself, is not the gods or whatever supernatural presence. The root cause of evil is sin. That is the disobedience of Adam and Eve, the first created man and woman who disobeyed God by eating the forbidden fruit. That's what brought sin into the world, and through sin came violence and death. Jesus Christ, the Son of God, God incarnated, who was there at creation, who was the Word of creation, came then, incarnated, to undo the curse of sin through His death and resurrection at the cross. Then Jesus received all powers on earth and in heaven, and which led Him to call His disciples to teach the nation to obey His rule, to live according to His rule. And because Jesus is the Prince of Peace, then any nation who learns to live according to the way of Jesus, who receives Jesus, recognizes Jesus as Lord, well, that nation would begin to experience the peace of God. And this is what happened in Norway. Generations of Norwegians would be introduced to the gospel, quite imperfectly, we have to concede that, but nevertheless the gospel came to Norway. And this is the only reason that we can possibly find in order to understand the transformation of Norway from that ancient paganism, which was brutal, even though nowadays we hear people claiming the opposite. It was brutal. Nevertheless, Christianity came to pacify the Norwegians and generated people such as Hans Nielsen Hauge, whose statue is just about a kilometer away from that crossroads, and who was the father of Norwegian industry. That is because he had learned from the Bible the care for his neighbor, the love of his neighbor, rather than wanting to subject him into slavery, such as it was the case according to the ancient pagan belief system. So I'm Cedric Placentino. See you next time for another stage of European Journeys.